The energy in Chicago this week was electrifying from the windows to the walls as people got prepared for this historic event.
All right, roomies, this is your girl, Legally Hype, and I am down here live on the ground floor at the DNC. And when I tell you we got a lot going on down here, for the first time ever in history, the DNC has credentialed creators to cover what's going on out here. In addition to that, the Democratic Party will be nominating Kamala Harris as their presidential candidate. Let's get into it.
Kamala Harris truly understands the unseen labor and unwavering commitment that has always made America great.
Miss Fudge, you've been in the game for quite some time, okay? Can you tell us what this moment means for us as Black Americans and for this country?
I think what it says so many times, we think that America really should live up to its promise. This is showing that America really can live up to its promise. But it's also showing that those of us who have toiled for so long are finally going to be rewarded. We are finally going to get our due. I feel so good about knowing that I have a sister that's going to be the President of the United States. I can't even describe it. It gives me chills.
I'm hoping that in this convention, we do our part to pay homage to the great Shirley Chisholm, because she blazed that trail initially for us. She basically said, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and knock on this door, and eventually somebody gonna go on and kick it through. And so that's what it's about. It's about showing the greatness and why we consistently say that Black girls are magic, because we are.
He plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds.
This is the first year that the DNC has credentialed creators to cover the entire convention. Yes. So now I want to know, how do you think your platform, using your platform, will have an impact on the election this year?
Well, first and foremost, I think we all just need to get hip to that the world is always changing and we have to move with the change. The reason that creators are here is, one, is that these creators are here because they actually have platforms that are built around these topics. I mean, we got lawyers, we got attorneys, we got every little bit of people that exist in the real world.
We like to get into the nitty-gritty. Like, let's really talk about the facts. And so I think, being able to use my platform to share those resources, fact check. People have heard a lot of things, and unfortunately, the loudest, most grating voice is usually the one that they listen to because it's constant.
Right.
And I think that, having someone to really be like, no, I know that's what you've heard, but here's what it is.
Absolutely.
I think that that's helpful. And so that's how I'm planning on using my platform.
One must ask, why exactly is it that they don't trust women? Well, we trust women. We trust women. And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law.
TSR News, it's Legally Hype.
We just wrapped up the DNC here in Chicago. What did it mean? What was accomplished, if anything at all? Does it change anything? And is Kamala Harris the new savior for Black people? We're going to discuss that today. Welcome to our podcast, Prince Power Hour.
Get ready for power. Prince's Power Hour podcast.
To the fore, welcome back again to another installment of Prince's Power Hour podcast, where we like to discuss a number of factors, but we want to discuss what's important, what is vital and critical to Black people here in America, throughout the diaspora, and throughout the planet, but doing it in a way where we understand the psychology, the sociology, and the reality of an acculturation process that we have been victimized by, that has us working against our own best self-interest. How to reverse it, and how to implement the necessary cultural practices, stratagems that not just benefits us in the present, but benefits us for generations to come. First and foremost, giving all honor and praise to the creator of the heavens and the earth. We thank him for all that he has done to allow us to be in this position. We thank those who preceded us, our ancestors, and those who have paved the way, and our elders. I greet you all in the words of peace. Shalom, shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. We are in an interesting time, brother and sister. As always, this podcast seriously is one that is built on the principle of having a critical eye and then having the necessary discussions. Intelligent discussions that we're able to dissect these things in a strategic manner that allows us to get past the emotion or the feeling that is produced by the emotion, get past the rhetoric, get past the propaganda, get past all of those factors that can sometimes imprison us to our own inhibitions or our own fears or our own sense of progress that has us stagnant and does not allow us to grow in a way that, again, gives us freedom, allows us to sustain freedom, and allows us to pass on the power and the freedom that is necessary for the generations to come. So a lot of what this is predicated on, the podcast, these conversations, these particular subject matters, is how that if we're the most intelligent, if we're the first, rather, let me start with that. If we're the first people on the planet, if we are the fathers and the mothers of civilization, of the sacred sciences, of everything that is advantageous and beneficial for the planet, and some things that are not so beneficial, if we are the curators of culture, how did we get to this point? In the very DNA of the original black man and woman, you have what is found, and not just in the soil of the earth, but in the ethers of the universe, right? Like, you are intrinsically connected and tied to the power of the universe and the power of the creator of the universe, right? I think most of us can come to that conclusion relatively easy. But yet and still, we get to a point where there is some type of disconnect where, again, with all of that being known, the application of said knowledge is not bearing the necessary fruit, right? So in essence, though we have external, real, tangible enemies, it seems at the end of the day, when we reduce everything to its lowest common denominator, we're our own worst enemy. Not of our own selves, but the reality is still the reality. The psychology that we have assumed, the socialization that we have been subjected to, has us in a perpetual mindset of practicing and proliferating a behavior and attitude that keeps us imprisoned and keeps us from growing and progressing. So that's what I want to talk to. So we're going to discuss the DNC because there's some things I want to talk to because I was there physically. I had the opportunity to be down there a couple days and actually be in the midst of the Democratic National Convention in the United Center, as well as I had to be at different social settings and environments surrounding the DNC and be in those particular circles where there are, particularly black circles, where our congressional members and other elected officials is pumping the rhetoric, hey, we got to get Kamala in, we got to get Kamala in, we got to get Kamala in. And even when they don't or did not say that, again, pushing the importance of voting, and not just in Illinois, because Illinois is, traditionally a Democratic state and it's got somewhat of a stronghold, but being able to influence and getting the messaging out for the perceived swing states that will impact this election. And I said, there's something deeper there than identity politics, than party fidelity, then even the personal belief that what I am participating in by practicing the perceived values and promoting the messaging of the Democratic Party, and this isn't me, disparaging the Democrats because I'm in line with the Republicans. No, that's not it at all. But it's something about the Democratic Party in the last 60 years that it has a mental headlock on black people. And again, I didn't attend the RNC. I thought I wanted to, just to kind of see what the environment is like, to familiarize myself with the other side of the coin, with the other wing of the bird, so to speak. But due to my schedule, I just couldn't get up to Milwaukee, and probably ideal based on what had preceded the Republican National Convention with the attempt on former President Donald Trump's life. But I was in the building here in Chicago, where I'm currently located and stationed and based out of, for the Democratic National Convention. And a lot of our political relationships in Chicago, positions us to be in certain rooms that most people aren't privy to because of their Democratic affiliation. So I get a firsthand account on that, which is the strangling of the political identity of black people, if you would call it that, here in America. So I said, what is the deeper issue, right? Like my mission the last year or so is to look at the psychology of black people, because we understand the psychology conditions the mind, and the mind is the representation, is the manifestation of the mentality of a person, and is how they see themselves, and is how they see the world, right? And their position or place in the world. Like, what would take what I mentioned before, the greatness of us, to be reduced to the bottom in everything we do, even in our greatness presently, but our inability to produce the necessary products and byproducts of a great people, meaning having our own land, language, and culture, determining our own reality, not being subjected to the culture of another people, not being condemned and permanently reduced to second or non-citizens in the sense of not identification, but in the sense of having power and presence within a particular nation. That is absent. So when I say I'm studying the psychology, what would have us think that we want freedom, that we want justice, that we want our own, but yet have an attitude and a behavioral practice that is reflective of the complete opposite of that reality? So I said, I gotta study the psychology of our people. So today, the title is the bifurcated, psychology of an enslaved people, right? The worldview, the way you see yourself in the world, politically, geopolitically, culturally, financially, materially, spiritually, intellectually, determines, right, your success. When you don't see yourself in a position of power, and I don't mean a pseudo power based on ego or based on your ability to have adornments or to acquire, certain material things, but I mean the ability to determine your own future and to define your own reality, and to not just define your own reality, but have other people accept and respect your definitions. That's absent, brothers and sisters. That's completely absent. So we say bifurcated, divided or forked into two separate aspects or branches. So when I say the bifurcated psychology of a people, I'm talking about a people or a person who is unaware that their actions will not pursue or produce the perceived or desired effects. He was like, well, that seems similar to cognitive dissonance, right? Like cognitive dissonance is a little different. It's like knowing, like if you smoke cigarettes, knowing the cancerous results of it, knowing the harmful effects of it, but you still do it, right? It's like when your thought or your mind holds two contradicting thoughts simultaneously. But a bifurcated psychology is a people who is forked, right? They're separate. Their reality is separate from their perceived desires. We practice behaviors, right? We actualize certain actions that is not in line with the desired outcome, and we repeat it continuously. I was reading an article entitled Creating Black Americans, the African American History and Its Meanings, 1619 to the Present, by Neil Irvin Painter. And he spoke to the reality of this, and quote, enslaved individuals often had to suppress their emotions and maintain a facade of cheerfulness and avoid showing any signs of resistance or independent thought. This repression led to the psychological issues such as depression, anxiety, and symptoms, akin to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I would correct Brother Neil in this regard that it's not akin. It exactly is. It is post-traumatic stress disorder or something greater. But let's go back and look at this. Why did this stand out to me like the proverbial sore thumb? It says, enslaved individuals often have to suppress their emotions, maintain a facade of cheerfulness. Your brother, was in the DNC. I was in the United Center. I seen black people, to my own dismay, continuously jumping up and down, cheering, in a very boisterous and loquacious way, right? Like giving their all, exuding every ounce of energy that they had, as if this was, to our Christian family, the second coming of Jesus. Like, they all waiting for Jesus. Kamala had a messianic religious connotation around it in the way they represented and presented their love for Kamala Harris and her perceived presidency. It was akin to Barack Obama, but even the way that they spoke, and that's why I played that clip at the beginning, because you can hear the undertones of the conversation. It was as if everything up until this point was erased, and her nomination happened in a vacuum, and she just fell out of heaven, right? It was like we didn't have Obama for 8 years. He ran on a similar platform for being the first black man to be elected, the first black person to be elected to the highest office in America, something that most people thought that they would never see in their lifetime, and people didn't up until that point. But a lot of people who were of age, or even young people, never foreseen a reality that a black man would hold the president or the president's seat of these United States. And they spoke in that same vein of our sister, this black woman, she is going to change the whole trajectory of black people. It never was articulated how, when, and why, even as she holds the second highest office, at least in theory, of these United States, the vice presidency, which a lot of people say, in essence, because of Joe Biden's cognitive decline that she really is the one that's perceivably calling the shots. Is not doing it now. Like, none of those answers were brought forth, nor was that discussion even had in a fair and just way, right? But yet people cheered. And not only did they cheer and maintain a sense of happiness and pride, those who have been reluctant or may have had some reservations or concerns, they were void of showing any form of resistance or independent thought. Like, you would be crucified to bring up the most legitimate of arguments in regards to what is actually happening right now. What is actually happening? Like, the spectacle, which was the DNC, the bringing out of the entertainers, the interesting fact that Oprah, and I seen her live speak, that Donald Trump just wants to, get in office and make money for his billionaire friends. Like, the irony of a billionaire saying that this other perceived billionaire only wants to look out for other billionaires. It was the most inauthentic thing, and that doesn't discredit nothing what our sister Oprah or anybody else that got up and spoke to that reality. But it was so disheartening that it was a complete insult on the intelligence of black people, because never, and I could say that almost wholeheartedly, I know Kamala on her speech did speak to some of the things that she said she would do, but it was so vague and it was so superficial, and it was almost as if she was using a lot of the rhetoric that, and I'm not no Trump supporter, but that Trump had previously stated, like even the example of not taxing tips. I'm like, he said irrespective, but you spend an inordinate amount of time for 4 days straight, every speaker making their predominant message on discrediting Trump instead of speaking to the issues that is important to their base. You say, well, black people, black women and black men are the driving force of the Democratic Party. You don't have one democratically elected politician if you don't have the support of black men and women. It's no other way to put it. Not in this day and time. Maybe in the time of the Dixiecrats, and that's before they switched to be Republicans. It seems like they kind of switched sides. But in the last 60 years, that's been the reality. And then I looked and I said, absolutely. It's complete hypocrisy. My brother said Kamala was the deciding vote to put taxes on tips. As I'm saying, the insult to black people that you are so unintelligent that you won't even do a simple Google search on the reality and the history of said people. Like, that you would be so enamored by the spectacle and the display and the circuitry of what was going on at the DNC and henceforth, that all the previous decisions and votes and positions and policies of Kamala and other people and Democrats in general would be abated or ignored to the point that you would only judge her on the merit of the moment of what they're saying. It's a complete insult. I seen them parade Brother Reverend Jesse Jackson out. I seen them parade these different entertainers. I seen them bring One thing I will give them, the DNC does play to the fact of, hey, let's galvanize, let's centralize around this person, right? Like, let's put our energy, our time, our effort behind this person because the party is more important than the particular personality. I will give them that, something black people can learn, right? Like, we can centralize around an idea. It doesn't necessarily have to be a particular person, but we can centralize around a particular idea that empowers us to achieve a said goal or desired outcome. That is something that can be emulated and should be emulated and replicated and implemented amongst us. But the issue is that we do it for everybody else but ourselves. And I said, if you look at the psychology of black people, right, and it's a very disheartening thing because we understand we're our own worst enemies. You're absolutely right. Jesse was endorsed by Trump, and Trump loved, and I don't mean love in the most literal sense, but I mean their ability to praise and work with each other, because Trump was a Democrat up until 2015, 2016. They brought up the Central Park Five, and I get back to my point, but they brought up the Central Park Five, and I bring that up all the time. Like, hey, you can't, Trump has not always been a fan of black people. We know the op-ed that he took out in the New York Times. But let's not forget, it was the Democrats that brought the charges up on the Central Park Five. The prosecutor was a Democrat and still is to this day, supported Hillary, supported Obama with actual resources and so forth and so on. They had a black mayor, or not a black, but they had a Democratic mayor at the time. What am I saying? I'm saying that we look at things so foolishly. We're governed by our feelings and not by the facts or the reality. And that has caused us great harm and great stagnation. And our children are inheriting a hell on earth because our refusal to remove behaviors that does not produce freedom. But speaking about the psychology of an enslaved people, right? It says that, and I go back to the quote that I read earlier, that enslaved individuals often had to suppress their emotions, maintain a facade of cheerfulness, and avoid showing any signs of resistance or independent thought. That repression led to psychological issues. Whenever you have a psychological issue, to deal with it and have your physical existence still be extended, you have to develop a coping mechanism. That coping mechanism is intended to attenuate or to possibly, if possible, eradicate the pain that is felt through the dehumanization process. Coping mechanism. Let me just read to it. Coping mechanisms help people stay calm until they adjust to change. I'm going to define adjust real quick. I know we know what these words mean, but let's look at it so we just hear what we actually doing, because it's all relative. To adjust, to change something so that it fits, corresponds, or conforms. Adapt, to accommodate, to adjust, to change. So you don't change something in the sense that you take one behavior and remove it. You change the way you deal with the reality, your perception of it. Coping mechanisms allow you to conform or adapt to said stimuli, not eradicate it. Coping mechanisms allow you to deal with the pain, the discomfort, the disruption, not eradicate it. They also help people cope with difficult events, relationships, and more by reducing negative emotions. Remember, we talked about it last week. Emotions are the chemical response to physical stimuli. Let me say it right. So when you reduce your response to the emotion, the negative emotion, or numb the negative emotion, the result of said external stimuli that is disrupting you isn't eradicated. It's just how you respond to it, or trying to kill off a part of the brain that processes those negative emotions so that you can eradicate or solve it is now mitigated, and then you just deal with it by coping with it. I hope y'all follow me here. We have learned through coping mechanisms, the rewiring of our psychological and neurological circuitry, and our psychological processing, to develop mechanisms that allow us to deal or adapt or accommodate or adjust to or conform to the negative stimuli rather than deal with it head on and eradicating it. Coping mechanisms can be positive, adaptive, or negative, maladaptive, right? What does it mean for brain health, all right, to now develop coping mechanisms that allow you to abate the negative feeling or emotion rather than to deal with it? We'll get into that, but I want to stop there. The things that we developed to deal with the dehumanization process or try to give us some sense of identity as a mechanism of dealing with the onslaught of the pain and the hurt and the damnation, we've gotten stuck there. And so we live with the coping mechanisms rather than the solutions or the pursuit of the solutions that really empower us. We have psychologically drugged ourselves with the coping mechanisms of religion, politics, social and economic perceived amalgamation as a means of dealing with our enslavement and finding peace in it. Whew. When I looked into the eyes of our people, it was a beautiful thing when you wear your sense of identity and your ability to be awake amongst those who are not awake or have not been awakened to truth, right? They try to attribute it to, man, your skin is clear and you got a glow, or you dress nice, or you're in shape, or you got a nice smile, or you got good dental hygiene or whatever. Like, they try to attribute it to those things, and those things have its factor. But you can walk in a room and demand the attention of the room because you are a light. You are a light not by what's on you, but what's in you. And I realize, being amongst my people who now have drugged themselves with these coping mechanisms of politics and like, hey, if I just keep voting Democrat, if I just keep trying to amalgamate and ingratiate myself into the system, something will change, because I've been told at some point with this chopped up, maladjusted history that our ancestors died to vote, and the absence of voting is what's got us in this position, even though we've been voting since, and it hasn't changed nothing unto itself, because the mind behind the vote, or the intention behind the vote, or the reality behind what we're voting for and what we're trying to obtain is absent. The psychology is absent of a free thinking people we don't produce nothing. But instead of pulling ourselves out of those coping mechanisms, because it's a sense of reward, right? Like, you feel good, perceivably so, in an environment where the lights are bright and you see, at least as far as complexion and skin color, somebody that is reflective of you as a perceived success, because they got to be successful, right? Like, they wouldn't have risen to that position. They wouldn't have this Secret Service and these security guards, and they wouldn't have all these people waving these signs with their names on it saying, "We want Kamala, we want Kamala." We see her outside of the reality of what she is based on the way the system has been functioning. I was here in Chicago. I was a young man, but I was here in Chicago. Listen, nothing will ever top in that realm the energy and the emotion in 2008. When that November, when he was elected the president of these United States, people was crying, young and old. And then for the next 8 years, black people, some would say, regressed. That if that wasn't, excuse the vernacular, a nigga wake-up call, I don't know what is. And we've seemingly fallen, or the way they've presented, about to fall for the same trick again. But I don't believe this time around black people are completely succumbed by the feeling that was brought to the surface of Obama's run for presidency, like Kamala is, and how they're presenting it. But it's still a large fraction of us who would rather live in the reality of the utility of the lie, live in the reality of the coping mechanisms, than deal with the reality that this ain't working. It hasn't worked, and it is not going to work. And if we don't change, it won't change. What does it mean for the brain health when repeated behavior such as coping mechanisms significantly impacts our neurology? Right? It affects, so when you have habits that you repeat, such as coping mechanisms that help you mitigate negative emotion and feeling, to try to trick your brain in the sense of reward, and reward isn't fulfilling the desired outcome. Reward is the emotion, the dopamines that something in the moment can bring forth. Like, we attribute that as reward. That's why people are addicted to sex, addicted to drugs. Like, you get these little dopamine, food hell. You get these dopamine hits that your brain now has been conditioned to see as a reward. And you're addicted to the dopamine hits, not the addiction, because your mind wants to find some sense of homeostasis by rewarding itself, because you deal with so much pain and hurt throughout your daily life. And because there's no balance, relatively speaking, you're stressed at work, you're stressed at home, you're stressed when you are inundated with the images, whether it's on social media or terrestrial television, of the denigration and the degradation of black people. You got to see it within your families. You know what I'm saying? Even the best of us are riddled with the realities of this subjugation that we've been under for 400 years and the residue of it. So it starts to affect our neuroplasticity, and the habit formation and the reinforcement learning process starts to change the circuitry of the brain. That now, listen, this is so important, right? I'm not a neurologist, hell, I'm not a psychologist, but to understand the basics of science and how the brain functions, how your circuitry functions and affects your psychology, which affects your sociology, which affect all things that's in your life and all the things that is involved with your well-being and your overall health, you understand kind of how to attack this thing in another way. Your neuroplasticity refers to the brain cells and the ability to reorganize itself by forming neural connections throughout its life. Neuroplasticity, the stretching of the brain, refers to the reorganization of itself. The brain, as a mechanism of survival, is, from its orientation, designed to protect itself by all means. The overall organism of the body tries to function and to promote life, but each individual organ, and it goes to cell and so forth and so on, but so we don't get too much into minutia, each organ has its own defense mechanism that it tries to use to protect itself, right? It's just the reality of things. Like you get a single cell organism, an amoeba, and put it under a microscope, and you try to prick at it with a smaller needle, it moves, right? A single cell organism has the intelligence to avoid attack. So think about the complexity of the brain and other multi cell organisms that have a high level of utility and intelligence. The brain, through neuroplasticity, reorganizes itself to deal with the realities of its environment. So when behavior is repeated, the brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with that behavior, making it more automatic and efficient over time. But you can reprogram your brain to be efficient in behavior that is disadvantageous to itself. Ooh, man. Your brain can be programmed to automatically produce stimuli, i.e. what we spoke, those dopamine hits, based on behavior that actually is deteriorating and destroying it. We as a collective organism, as a people, have developed a behavioral attitude, have developed the social connections and pathways amongst one another to produce a behavior automatically to work against our own best self-interest. And we have become efficient in the destruction of each other. See, look at the reality of our criminality. Look at the reality of the destruction of the family. Look at the reality. We have been trained and programmed to try to survive, right? Remember, we started selling drugs to each other as a means of survival. When you go to the origin of black men selling drugs or black women selling drugs to their own brothers and sisters in the community, it was to escape economic deprivation. Even though the selling of those drugs and those harmful substances eroded the very environment in which they had to live and survive in. But the premise was survival. But when you feed something that is in opposition with life, it only gives death. No matter how efficient you come at it, you become at it. Well, I want us to understand like what we're talking about, right? Because when we talk about acculturation, when we talk about the subculture that we develop, when we talk about the process of our behavioral, social, psychological realities, we're talking about something that has been practiced over and over again. We said we know the problem. Yeah, we know these symptoms, but I don't think we really know the problem. I don't think we really understand that there is no place for us in the society, that everything has been inundated with the necessary stimuli that destroys the very fabric of you and I. And as long as we participate and continue to participate and continue to participate in the very realities that was created and sustained on the identity and the principles of your subjugation, you will perpetually and permanently be subjugated. That's just what it is. Habit formation. Repeated behaviors can lead to habit formation where actions become automatic responses to specific cues. It's a reason in the brain that involves habit learning and decision making. This helps select actions that maximize reward and minimize negative outcomes by learning from dopamine signals over time. So the chemical process, the neurological chemical process of releasing dopamines allows you to prioritize the perceived reward or the feeling that is produced chemically in the brain to give you the idea of reward or relief of that stress by minimizing negative outcomes. So the brain has in it an escape mechanism built in so that if you're not completely conscious and cognizant and present in the moment to deal with the reality and to eradicate the issue or the problem. So the expression of what we escape in real life or try to escape the realities of our life is happening neurologically, subconsciously, and unconsciously in our day-to-day activities. As behaviors are repeated, the neural circuitry involved becomes more efficient, leading to the establishment of habits. These habits, these coping mechanisms, in essence, are the root of our issues and problems. Last little bit on the science. Model-based versus model-free based decision making. Now, we talked about how our brain has the neuroplasticity has allowed us to adapt different practices that allow us to adjust, therefore forming habits that now mitigate negative emotion and increase positive emotion by chasing dopamine, not chasing change, not chasing freedom, not chasing empowerment, not chasing the information and understanding and the application of that information that gives us the desired outcome, but the feeling that we did something versus the actuality of doing it and the reward that comes from doing something that is sustained. That's why we keep repeating the same behavior over and over again. Hell, a lot of us do that with knowledge and information. We don't get knowledge for the simple fact of empowerment. We get knowledge to be able to brag to other black people in particular that we know something. And the reward of a Negro or somebody or white people saying you smart is sufficient enough because it's a dopamine release in that makes you feel good in the moment, but then you go back to the same or even worse reality that you started with before you acquired that information and knowledge, or before somebody rewarded with, yo, that's a smart Negro. I want you to hear me. We're chasing a high, brothers and sisters. Our participation in the DNC was us chasing an high, us trying to relate and resonate with Kamala or whoever else is put before us. It's us chasing a high, us partying and listening to John Legend and whoever else they put on the stage, Stevie Wonder, us seeing them wheel out our brother, Reverend Jesse Jackson. He could barely talk, suffering from Parkinson's disease. And we looked at him, that wasn't high. Because we suspended the reality that we don't give a damn about Jesse Jackson. But we try to draw some pain. Oh man, they brought Jesse up. Man, I remember he was with King, Rainbow Push, this and that. But where's that? You see, we seen Obama and we seen Michelle. Man, that's our shining night. Man, we sure need Obama again. That's an high. Because the idea of seeing a man who's somewhat presents himself clean and well put together and seemingly intelligent and articulate, like, that's a dopamine high. Who don't want to see an articulate, intelligent, well-dressed black man? But the substance behind it, where's the substance? So we're chasing that dopamine. Decision making involves both model-based and model-free. Model-based decision making relies on a cognitive model of the environment to predict outcomes, while model-free is based on learned associations between actions and rewards. This is where decisions are made based on ingrained habits rather than deliberate consideration of outcomes. We remove the process of thinking and planning and then seeing those plans through. Our decisions are not based on the environment that presently presents itself, the history that developed and produced that current environment, and then where we want to see ourselves down the line, whether it be a year, 10 years, 100 years. We don't orient our decisions based on that. We orient our decisions based on actions and rewards. And reward being the sense of success, not actual success. You're absolutely correct, brother. Knowledge gives people a false sense of control. The brain is taking the less path of resistance. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we as a people are taking the least path of resistance. The path of least resistance, excuse me. Instead of galvanizing and centralizing around 3 or 4 core principles, hell, 1 or 2 core principles that positions us for power and then allows us to produce that power, we'll rather remove the heavy lifting of thinking and organizing and planning and the suffering and the toil that goes with that, because there is suffering in the burden of carrying a responsibility. It's not that the difficult things are hard. The difficult things take time, and they take sacrifice, and they take compromise. Not that you compromise your integrity more, but you compromise your willingness to reward yourself with dopamine in the moment, delayed gratification, but you position yourself for the great outcome. I suffer now so that I can be rewarded in the future. And that reward in the future may be actualized through my children, through my progeny, through the generations that succeed me. Reinforced learning, right, leads to biased decision making where individuals favor actions that have been previously rewarded, even if they are not optimal in the current context. When you've been conditioned to do something socially, that's why I say the psychology is directly tied into the sociology, and our sociology is directly tied into our psychology. And whenever you're talking about the psychology, you're talking about the neurology, because the neurology is a product of the psychology, and your brain is being programmed by your psychology, and your psychology is being developed and contextualized by your sociology. We've been socialized. We've been dehumanized by the socialization process of our enemy to accept nothing and like it. Remember now, we were people that were convinced that chitlins were actually food. And because we were able to mask it with hot sauce and other condiments, that we now tricked our mind and convinced ourselves that pig intestines is actually a delicacy. Well, we do that socially, we do that financially, we do that culturally, we do that spiritually. We're a people that practice Christianity, celebrate white Jesus, even if we put a black face on it and say it's our own. That's and I don't mean to be disrespectful. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying we practice the behaviors, the religious orientations, the cultural, the subcultural and acculturation of our enemies. Put some seasoning on it, put some condiments on it, and tell ourselves that we're not eating the fecal matter of our enemy. That we're not eating chitlins. The pig intestines where the fecal matter passes through. We convinced ourselves that. We convinced ourselves that. And so after 60 years of eating SHIT and not seeing no benefit from it, because it's reinforced learning and we're making model-free decisions that one time that we thought we had a reward, that we had that hit of dopamine, we still follow that because the opposite, we don't know what it produced. We know even if it's been forever, or even if it's not genuine, or even if it's not really aligned, we know we're going to get something from it, and that something just being a good feeling, that's sufficient for us to keep choosing and picking and deciding to go with the thing that is not optimal at all. So the salient choices are not based on what's most optimal due to the current circumstances, but what is habitual based on the perceived previous reward that actually is just an emotional, chemical stimulus that is short-lived and does not produce any real substantive change. Wow, I gotta do another interview after this. Man, if you're watching live, please, I'm scheduled at 6 to do the Knowledge Radio with our brothers Knowledge Born Allah. So I'm going to be on there for the next hour. So please, it's on his YouTube page, Do the Knowledge Radio. We're going to go there next. But let me say this as I wrap up. Please, real quick, if you got any questions, please put it in the chat real quick so I can see it. I'd love to answer it, respond to it. If you got a statement, I'll put it on the screen. But let me say this. We are entering into an era where we're not going to be able to endure off the previous habits and decisions and attitudes that led us unto this point. We are in a position where black people may still physically be alive, but the eradication or the attempt of the black God mind, of that revolutionary, independent thinking mind that was once seemingly more prevalent, is being washed away. That you and I, who are not just motivated, but are moved by this type of ideology and behavior, are becoming far and few between. Look at those who purport to be for our people. Most of them just want to be celebrities. Most of them just want to be seen. Most of them just want to be ingratiated in white society and accepted. There's very few of us that say, no, we got to do our own thing. No, we got to separate from the beast. No, this has to be destroyed and something has to be replaced. No, we have to pull ourselves out of this current existence and align ourselves with one that is really centralized around truth, life, real justice, equity, and the healing of ourselves and the healing of our planet. That we would rather go back into a period that we're less technologically advanced if it allows us to reset where we can heal our people and then redevelop ourselves for the generations to come. What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? Have you been so subdued by the amenities and accommodations of this world that your prison, as long as it has a television and an AC and a toilet, that you will omit the reality that you're in prison? If they can dress up the food and make it look pretty or taste like it's real food, it doesn't matter that it's not actually food, that you're eating plastics. That they can give you or purport to you that the issue in the black community is the nuclear black family, and that the eradication of the nuclear black family is going to better serve you than having man, woman, child, which is the basis for life. I'm saying that we've been flirting with freedom for too long, right? We've been intellectually masturbating and using a lot of rhetoric and shallow, superficial attempts. But now we are at the point where I don't believe that another 2 generations survive to the point where they're able to live with a mentality that even challenges the status quo versus removes it or eradicates it. That black people mentally and spiritually will be in complete darkness. And I'm saying, where do we stand in that regard? If you want to vote, by all means. But I implore you, value yourself enough where you have a plan, an agenda, and an objective. Because I can tell you, I don't want to tell mine, but I don't vote. And yet, I have personal relationships with every politician I want, because that stuff don't matter. If you can offer something and give something and you can add value, or you can impose your will, however that looks, maybe, then you got the ability to change any circumstance. So my access isn't my willingness to pledge my fidelity to a particular party or anything. It's that I have a particular identity and utility that allow, and a vision and a plan that allows me to be in rooms to bring forth an objective that, even if they're not cognizant of it or conscious of it, or even if we're not backing it, that we can have the power that we need, the independence and the salvation that we deserve. And I'm saying, if enough of us orient our thinking to that reality, this thing changes, man, overnight. The DNC ain't gonna save you. The RNC ain't gonna save you. Only we can save ourselves. But we're not gonna be able to do that if we continue in the same behavior, the same actions, the same thoughts, the same remedial, reductionist pursuit of power that is absent of anything that actually symbolizes power. But we actually do the work and make the sacrifices and take on the responsibility of a people who are willing to be free. People die for it, they kill for it, they do whatever for it. What are we willing to do in truth and righteousness to produce the desired effect? I thank you so much for listening. I leave you as I greeted you in the words of peace. Shalom, shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.